Tasha's back was pinned against the counter when the door of the diner exploded open. A trembling hand gripped her wrist so hard she'd have bruises by morning. A man's voice snarling that she should have given him his change faster, that she thought she could disrespect him in front of his friends, that she was about to learn what happened to people who embarrassed him. Her apron was soaked in spilled coffee, her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had $11 in her hand. $11 was about to get her hurt. Then the door didn't just open. It slammed back on its hinges, and a man walked in like the entire world owed him silence. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He simply looked at the man gripping Tasha's wrist the way someone looks at an insect they're deciding whether to bother stepping on. "Touch her," he said, voice low, flat, terrifyingly calm, "and I will destroy your entire existence." Nobody in that diner breathed, because the man standing in the doorway wasn't just some stranger playing hero. Tasha would later learn his name was Kim Jun-hyuk, and men like him did not make threats. They made promises. And within 90 seconds, that promise would come due because the man holding her wrist wasn't alone, and chaos was seconds from tearing through Coleman's diner on a rain-soaked Tuesday night, changing Tasha's entire life before she even had time to be afraid of the man who'd just saved her. If you love slow burn danger, forbidden romance that hit different, hit subscribe right now. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes is going to make you need to know how this ends. Let's get into it. Tasha Reynolds had worked the night shift at Coleman's Diner for 3 years. She knew the regulars, the drunks, the truckers who tipped in crumpled singles, and the occasional stranger who walked in looking like they didn't belong in this part of the city. She was 26, tired in the way that lived in her bones, and she had learned a long time ago that surviving meant staying invisible. Keep your head down. Take the orders. Smile even when your feet ache. Go home to an apartment with a broken heater and a mother's photograph on the nightstand, the only family she had left, the only piece of a past she barely remembered. She didn't know that a man had been watching that diner for 6 days. She didn't know his name yet, didn't know that somewhere in a penthouse across the city, a folder with her photograph in it had been sitting on a glass desk for weeks, next to a photograph of a woman who looked almost exactly like her, a woman who had been dead for 20 years. All Tasha knew, in that moment, was that a drunk customer named Bobby Hale had grabbed her wrist when she told him the bar was closing, had called her a word she refused to let herself repeat, and had shoved her hard into the counter when she pulled away. She knew the fluorescent lights above her were humming. She knew her hands were shaking. And she knew that the man who had just walked through the door looked like he belonged in a different world, entirely tailored black coat, sharp jaw, eyes so dark they looked like they'd swallowed every apology he'd never given. "You don't want to do this," Jun-hyuk said to Bobby, taking one slow step forward. "Stay back," Bobby snarled, shoving Tasha toward the stranger like she was a shield. "I don't know who you think you are. I'm the last mistake you'll make tonight." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. There was something in the way he said to them, the certainty, the stillness that made even Tasha, terrified as she was, believe him completely. Bobby's grip tightened on her arm. And that was when the diner's back door swung open too. 3 men in dark jackets flooded in, and Tasha understood, in the space of a single heartbeat, that Bobby Hale had never been the real danger in the room. These men weren't reacting to a bar fight. They were executing a plan. They moved with a kind of coordinated silence that made every hair on her arms rise. "Down," Jun-hyuk barked, and before Tasha could process the command, his arm hooked around her waist and pulled her behind the counter as the first of the men lunged toward them, overturning a table, sending plates and silverware crashing to the floor. She screamed. She couldn't help it. Her whole body folded into itself, pressed against cold linoleum, the sound of the fight breaking out above her fists, bodies slamming into the counter, glass shattering as someone was thrown into the display case, and the man who had just threatened to destroy a stranger over her honor was now covering her body with his. One arm braced above her head, his heartbeat slamming against her back so hard she could feel it through her shoulder blades. "Stay down," he said against her ear, voice suddenly urgent in a way it hadn't been before. "Stay exactly where you are." "Who are you?" she gasped. "What is happening?" Another crash. Someone shouted in Korean. Ceramic mugs shattered on the shelves above them as bodies collided with the counter. Tasha squeezed her eyes shut and thought, absurdly, of her mother's photograph on the nightstand, of the fact that she might not walk out of this diner the same person who'd walked in. Jun-hyuk rose just enough to look over the counter, and what Tasha saw on his face in that half-second wasn't fear. It was fury, cold, focused, terrifying fury, the kind that made her understand this man was not new to danger. This was a man who had been waiting for it. "They found her," he said, almost to himself. "They actually found her." "Found who?" Tasha whispered. His eyes dropped to hers, and for just a moment, something flickered there that looked almost like grief. "You," he said. "They found you." The struggle lasted 40 seconds. It felt like 40 years. By the time it stopped, 2 of the 3 intruders were on the ground, subdued and restrained with brutal efficiency by a 4th man Tasha hadn't even noticed enter a quiet, broad-shouldered man Jun-hyuk called Sung by name, without turning his head, like giving orders was as natural to him as breathing. The 3rd fled through the shattered front door, disappearing into the rain-slicked street, and Bobby Hale, the drunk who had started this whole nightmare with a demand for his change, had long since backed away and was curled against the pie case, forgotten, irrelevant, a footnote to a war he had accidentally wandered into. Tasha was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Jun-hyuk pulled her to her feet, his hands steady on her arms, his eyes scanning her face, her hands, her shoulders, checking for injuries that weren't there. "You're not hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. It sounded like relief disguised as a fact. "I don't understand what just happened." Her voice cracked. "Those men weren't after him." She looked at Bobby. "They came in through the back. They didn't even look at him. They looked at you." Jun-hyuk finished quietly. "They came for you. Why would anyone want to hurt me?
I'm nobody.
I'm a waitress. I make $11 an hour, and I live in a 1-bedroom with a leaking ceiling. I don't have enemies. I don't have anything anyone would want." Something crossed his face, pain, maybe, or guilt, or the particular exhaustion of a man about to break a promise to himself. "You have something more valuable than money," he said. "You have a name. And that name is the reason I've had someone watching this diner for 6 days." Tasha stepped back like he'd struck her. "You've been watching me? Protecting you. There's a difference." "From what? From who?" Her voice rose. Panic and fury tangled together. "I don't even know your name."
Kim Hyuk.
He said it plainly, like a man laying down a weapon in surrender. "And the men who just tried to take you work for a family that has been hunting your mother's bloodline for over 2 decades. The words landed like ice water down her spine. "My mother is dead. I know. She died when I was 6. Car accident. I don't even remember her voice." It wasn't an accident, Tasha. The diner was silent except for the wail of approaching sirens and Bobby's soft, pathetic crying against the pie case. Tasha stared at this stranger, this man who had just torn her entire understanding of her own life open with 6 words, and felt something in her chest crack down the middle. "You need to come with me," Jun-hyuk said.
Right now.
"Before those sirens arrive and before whoever sent those men realizes their first attempt failed and sends a second team that won't fail the same way. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't even know you." "You're right. You don't."
His jaw tightened.
"But I knew your mother. Or rather, my family did. And in about 90 seconds you're going to have to decide whether you trust a man who just stood between you and 3 armed strangers, or whether you'd rather take your chances with whoever sends the next team." As if summoned by his words, headlights swept across the shattered front window a black SUV, moving too slowly, too deliberately, past the diner. Jun-hyuk's whole body went rigid. "They're already here," he said.
"Tasha. Now."
Something about the way he said her name, like he'd practiced saying it in his head 100 times before tonight, made the decision for her. She grabbed her coat, and he was already pulling her toward the back exit, Sung falling into step behind them, when the SUV's brakes screeched against wet asphalt, doors flying open, 3 more men spilling out onto the sidewalk. She didn't scream this time. She just ran. If your heart is racing right now, imagine how Tasha felt. This story is only getting started, and I promise you the next reveal is going to break you. Drop a comment below telling me if you think Jun-hyuk is telling the truth about her mother, hit that like button, and stay with me because what Tasha discovers about her own identity in the next few minutes changes everything you think you know about this story. They didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, tucked into the back of a car with blacked-out windows that had apparently been waiting the entire time, engine already running, like Jun Hyuk had planned for this exact outcome. Tasha sat pressed against the door, putting as much distance between them as the seat allowed, her hands still trembling in her lap.
Start talking, she said. Now.
All of it. Jun Hyuk exhaled slowly, and for the first time since he'd walked into that diner like a man who owned a room, he looked tired. Human. Almost young. My family runs an organization, he said carefully. You'd call it a mafia. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. My father built an empire in Seoul before expanding here 15 years ago, and when he died, I inherited not just his business, but his enemies. One of those enemies is a man named Cho Min-suk. 23 years ago, your mother worked for my father. Worked for him how? She was his translator, his most trusted advisor. Actually, she spoke 5 languages and had a mind for numbers that made her indispensable. And she fell in love with someone in my father's inner circle. Someone Cho Min-suk wanted to be destroyed for betraying him first. Tasha's mouth had gone dry. Are you telling me my father was some kind of criminal? I'm telling you your father was my father's most loyal lieutenant, and when Cho Min-suk discovered the affair between your parents, he saw an opportunity. He had your father removed from the picture entirely. Your mother fled the country with you, changed her name, buried her past so deep that even my family lost track of her for over a decade. We assumed you were both gone until 8 months ago, when a facial recognition match on a job application pulled up your photograph. You had my picture. I had orders to find you before Cho Min-suk's people did, because if he ever learned that Elena Reynolds' daughter was alive, he stopped himself.
What?
What happens? His dark eyes met hers, and there was something unbearably gentle in them now, a contrast so sharp against the chaos of 20 minutes ago that it made her chest ache. Then he learns that the woman who humiliated him by helping your father expose something that nearly destroyed his empire has a daughter who is the last living witness to what really happened that night. And he will not rest until you're silenced. Which means, as of tonight, neither will I. The penthouse Jun Hyuk brought her to occupy the top 3 floors of a building with no name on the directory, the kind of place that existed for people who needed to disappear. Tasha stood in the middle of a living room bigger than her entire apartment, arms wrapped around herself, feeling like a stray animal that had wandered somewhere it didn't belong. You're safe here, Jun Hyuk said, watching her from the doorway like he was afraid to come closer. Nobody outside my inner circle knows this location. Safe. She let out a broken laugh. 2 hours ago, the worst thing in my life was a customer who wouldn't tip. Now I'm hiding in a penthouse because some mob boss in Seoul wants me gone over something that happened before I could even talk. I know this is impossible to process. Do you? She turned on him, and all the fear she'd been swallowing for 2 hours finally cracked into fury. My mother lied to me my entire childhood. She let me believe my father died before I was born. She never told me a single true thing about where we came from, and now she's been dead for 20 years and I can't even ask her why. She was protecting you. By lying to me? By keeping you alive. His voice sharpened, just slightly, just enough to remind her that underneath the tailored coat and the careful gentleness was a man who commanded a small army without raising his voice. Elena Reynolds spent the last years of her life making sure Cho Min-suk's people never connected her daughter to the woman who humiliated him. She changed her name. She moved countries. She raised you in obscurity on purpose, Tasha, because the alternative was raising you as a target. Tasha's anger drained out of her all at once, leaving something worse behind: grief, sharp and sudden, for a mother she barely remembered and had never truly known. I don't even know what she looked like when she smiled, she whispered. Something shifted in Jun Hyuk's expression, and for a moment, he looked like he might cross the room to her.
He didn't.
I have photographs, he said instead. From before. My father kept records of everyone in his inner circle. I could show you if you wanted. Why would you do that for me? Because you deserve to know who you came from.
A pause.
And because I promised myself a long time ago that I would find Elena's daughter and make sure what happened to her mother never happened to her. You didn't even know me an hour ago. I've known about you for 8 months, he corrected quietly. I watched a video of you laughing with a coworker in that diner before I ever spoke a word to you. I read your file more times than I should admit. I told myself it was surveillance. It stopped being surveillance somewhere around month 3. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unplanned, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. Tasha felt her pulse stutter, felt heat rise in her face despite everything, despite the chaos and the grief and the impossible night she'd just survived. That's insane, she said, but it came out softer than she intended.
I'm aware.
You don't even know me. I know you cover for your coworkers when they're running late. I know you give free coffee to the man who sleeps outside the laundromat on 5th. I know you've worked double for 3 years straight to pay for an apartment with a broken heater instead of asking anyone for help, because the one time you did, someone let you down, and you decided you'd rather freeze than depend on people again. He said it plainly, without pride, like a man confessing a sin. I know more about you than I have any right to. I'm not proud of how I know it, but I won't pretend I don't. Tasha stared at him, breath caught somewhere in her throat, torn between the instinct to run and something else entirely, something dangerous and warm that had no business existing between a waitress and a man who had just admitted to studying her like a case file for 8 months. I should hate you for that, she said. You should. I don't. The air between them went taut as wire. He took one step closer, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the restraint in every line of his body, a man holding himself back from something he wanted badly. Tasha. Her name in his mouth sounded like an apology and a confession at once. I need you to understand that from this moment forward, I am not going to let anything happen to you.
Not chow mein soup.
Not his men. Nothing. But I need you to trust me, and I know that's an impossible thing to ask of a woman I dragged out of her own life in the middle of an ambush. Trust doesn't come from someone almost getting me hurt. No, he agreed. It comes from what I do next. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed against a table, and whatever softness had gathered in his face vanished instantly, replaced by the same cold focus she'd seen in the diner. He answered without a greeting. He listened. His knuckles went white around the phone. Say that again, he said, voice suddenly dangerous. Tasha watched color drain slightly from his face, watched a muscle jump in his jaw, watched a man who commanded armies go very, very still. Understood, he said finally and hung up. What happened? He turned to her slowly, and there was something new in his eyes now, not fear, exactly, but something adjacent to it.
Dread. That was Sung, he said.
He just confirmed how Cho Min-suk's men knew exactly which diner you worked at, exactly which shift, exactly when to strike. He paused, and the pause felt like the edge of a cliff. Someone inside my own organization gave them the information. Someone I trusted. Who? His eyes darkened. My cousin, Daniel. Before Tasha could ask another question, the lights in the penthouse cut out completely, plunging them into darkness, and somewhere below them, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door being forced open. Jun-hyuk moved through the darkness like he'd memorized every inch of the penthouse with his eyes closed. His hand found Tasha's wrist and pulled her down behind the kitchen island a half-second before the sound of splintering would tore through the front entrance. Stay low, he breathed. Follow me exactly. How many? She whispered, shocked at how steady her own voice sounded, like some part of her had already accepted that this was her life now. Doesn't matter. We're not staying to find out. He led her through a hidden panel behind the bookshelf, a service corridor she never would have noticed existed, moving fast, silent, his body angled in front of hers the entire time like a shield he'd assigned himself without being asked. Somewhere behind them, she heard Sung's voice barking orders, heard the controlled chaos of trained men engaging trained men, the crash of furniture overturned, of bodies grappling in the dark, disciplined and forceful and entirely hand-to-hand. They emerged into a stairwell, and Jun-hyuk finally allowed himself a breath, back pressed to the wall, listening. Your own cousin sold me out, Tasha said between gasps. Why? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. Is this normal for you? Betrayal, break-ins, people trying to get to the woman you just met. Something almost like a broken laugh escaped him. No, he admitted. This is the first time I've ever brought someone into this life on purpose instead of trying to keep them out of it. Why me? He looked at her then, really looked at her, despite the danger pressing in on every side. Because for the first time in 8 months of watching your file, tonight I stopped seeing a name on a page and started seeing a person I couldn't lose. The confession cracked something open in her chest that she didn't have time to examine because footsteps thundered on the stairwell above them and Jun Hyuk's expression hardened back into ice in an instant. Down, he ordered. And they descended 2 flights at a dead run, bursting out into an underground parking garage where a second car plane, unmarked, forgettable, was already waiting with Sung at the wheel, a bruise darkening above his eyebrow, jaw set with barely restrained fury. Daniel, Sung said the moment they were inside, tires screeching out of the garage. It's confirmed. Financial records. A wire transfer to an account linked to Cho Min-suk 3 weeks ago. Your cousin has been feeding him information since before the girl was even found. Since before. Jun Hyuk repeated slowly, and Tasha watched something click into place behind his eyes, something that looked like betrayal reorganizing itself into strategy. That means Daniel didn't just find out about Tasha recently. He's known since the beginning, which means he's the one who told Cho Min-suk where to find her in the first place. Why would your own family do that to you? Tasha asked. Jun Hyuk's jaw tightened until the muscles stood out sharp against his skin. Because if I lose everything without an heir, the organization passes to the next eldest male in the bloodline. That's Daniel. He looked out the window at the city blurring past, streetlights smearing gold across rain-slicked glass. He's been trying to inherit my father's empire since we were teenagers. Feeding Cho Min-suk information about you accomplishes 2 things for him. It weakens Cho Min-suk's oldest grudge by handing him his revenge, buying Daniel goodwill with a rival family. And it puts me directly in the middle of a conflict I'll either be consumed by or so distracted by that I can't run the organization properly. So, I'm not just a target, Tasha said slowly, understanding dawning like a cold wave. I'm a weapon. Against you. You're not a weapon. His voice was fierce, immediate. You're a woman my cousin decided was expendable in a chess game for power. That's different. That's not something you did. That's something being done to you. The car went quiet except for the hum of tires on wet asphalt. Tasha pressed her palm flat against her chest, trying to steady a heartbeat that hadn't slowed since the diner door exploded open 2 hours ago. I need you to tell me everything, she said finally. Not pieces. Not what you think I can handle. Everything about my mother, my father, and what Cho Min-suk actually wants from me. Jun Hyuk studied her for a long moment, streetlight sliding across the hard planes of his face, and then he nodded once, like a man laying down the last of his defenses. Your father's name was David Reynolds, he said. He wasn't Korean, and that alone made him an outsider in my father's organization, someone who had to work twice as hard to be trusted. He earned that trust by uncovering evidence that Cho Min-suk, then my father's second-in-command, had been embezzling from the organization for years and funneling the money into a rival operation he was quietly building behind my father's back. Your father brought that evidence to my father. Cho Min-suk was exiled, stripped of his rank, humiliated in front of the entire organization. He swore revenge that night. It took him 3 years to get it. He had your father disappear in what looked like a robbery gone wrong. Your mother, who had loved your father in secret because relationships between staff and inner circle were forbidden, took you and vanished before Cho Min-suk could finish what he started. Finish what? Erasing every trace that David Reynolds had ever existed, including his daughter. Tasha's hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time, from the weight of a truth 20 years in the making finally settling onto her shoulders. So, this isn't about revenge against your family at all, she said slowly. It's about revenge against my father. I'm not collateral damage. I'm the last piece of unfinished business. Yes, Jun Hyuk said quietly. And I intend to make sure you're the piece he never gets to finish. The car slowed, turning into another underground garage, this one heavier with security, guarded by men who nodded at Sung with the wordless recognition of soldiers. As they stepped out, Jun Hyuk's phone buzzed again. He read the message, and Tasha watched his entire body change, spine straightening, breath catching, something between fury and disbelief crossing his face. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the phone toward her. A single photograph. Tasha's apartment building, camera angle from across the street, timestamp from 20 minutes ago. Standing outside her door, illuminated by a street lamp, unmistakable even through the grainy image, was a woman. A woman who looked exactly like the photograph of Elena Reynolds sitting in the folder on Jun Hyuk's desk. "That's impossible," Tasha whispered. "My mother is dead." I watched them lower her casket into the ground. Jun Hyuk's face had gone the color of ash. "Did you," he said slowly, "or did you watch them lower a casket? We are far from done, and if this twist just made your jaw drop, you need to like this video right now and make sure you're subscribed, because the next revelation is going to completely rewrite everything you thought you understood about Tasha's mother."
Stay with me.
Tasha sat frozen in the back of the car, the question hanging in the air like something poisonous. "Did you watch them lower a casket, or did you watch them lower your mother?" "I was 6, she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I remember the funeral. I remember it raining. I remember holding my aunt's hand because my mother's family didn't want anything to do with me after that. I don't remember looking inside the casket. Nobody lets a 6-year-old look inside a casket. Closed casket funerals were common for people my father's organization needed to disappear," Jun Hyuk said carefully. "If your mother staged her own death to finally cut every tie between you and my father's world, a closed casket would have been the only way to make it believable without anyone examining the body too closely. Why would she fake her own death and then just leave me? Give me to an aunt who resented me? If she was trying to protect me, why not stay? Because staying would have meant leading Cho Min-suk directly to you every single day of your life. Disappearing completely, cutting contact, becoming a ghost that was the only way to guarantee he'd stop looking. A mother who is dead poses no threat and offers no bait."
He paused.
"It's the cruelest kind of love. The kind that chooses your safety over her own presence in your life." Tasha pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, holding back a sound that was half sob, half disbelieving laugh. "She's been alive my whole life. She let me grieve her for 20 years. We don't know that for certain yet. That photograph could be a trap. Cho Min-suk is capable of staging an image like that specifically to lure you somewhere unprotected. Then we go to my apartment and find out. Absolutely not." His voice snapped hard, immediate. "That's exactly the reaction he's counting on. That's my mother, Jun Hyuk." Her voice cracked on his name, on the impossible hope threading through the terror. 20 years I thought I was alone in this world. If there's even a chance that's really her, I have to know. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, hands coming up to frame her face, forcing her to look at him, and the intensity in his expression stole whatever she'd been about to say next. "I understand," he said, low and fierce. "I understand wanting the truth more than you want your own safety. But I made a promise to myself the moment I found your file 8 months ago, and I intend to keep it. I am not losing you to a trap Cho Min-suk built specifically to exploit the one thing he knows you'd walk into fire for." His thumb brushed, almost involuntarily, along her cheekbone. "Let me verify it's real first. Please." The word please, from a man who commanded people without raising his voice, undid something in her. "Okay," she whispered. His forehead dropped against hers, just for a moment, both of them breathing the same air, the chaos of the night finally catching up to both of them in the stillness. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," he murmured.
"Not Cho Min-suk?
"Not Daniel. Nothing. You keep promising me things you can't guarantee." "I know." His hand slid to the back of her neck, gentle, grounding. "I'm promising them anyway." She didn't know which one of them closed the distance first. His mouth found hers, soft at first, almost hesitant, like he was giving her every chance to pull away, and when she didn't, when her hands curled into the front of his coat instead, the kiss deepened into something neither of them seemed able to stop. It tasted like adrenaline and relief and 20 years of loneliness finally cracking open. Tasha felt something in her chest unlock that she hadn't realized had been locked at all, a wall built brick by brick over years of doing everything alone, of never letting anyone close enough to matter. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, Jun-hyuk pressed his lips to her forehead, holding her against him like he was afraid the world outside would take her the moment he let go. I have wanted to do that since the night I first watched your file, he admitted quietly. I told myself it was inappropriate, unprofessional. I told myself a lot of things to keep from admitting I was falling for a woman I hadn't even met yet. That's the strangest love story I've ever heard. It's the only one I have. Sung cleared his throat from a respectful distance, and Jun-hyuk stepped back, composure sliding back into place like armor. I'll send a team to verify the woman outside your apartment. Quietly. No confrontation, just confirmation. If it's really Elena, we bring her in safely, and you get every answer you've been owed for 20 years. And if it's a trap? His eyes went hard again, the softness of a moment ago hardening into something lethal. Then Cho Min-suk finds out exactly what happens to men who use a mother's memory as bait against her daughter. 2 hours passed in the penthouse's secondary safe house, an apartment even more sparse and anonymous than the first, while Tasha paced and Jun-hyuk fielded a stream of updates in rapid, clipped Korean that she couldn't understand but could read in the tension of his shoulders. Finally, his phone rang, and he answered on the first ring. He listened for a long moment, his eyes closed. Confirmed, he said, turning to Tasha, and something in his voice had gone thick with emotion he was visibly fighting to control. It's her. It's really her. She's been living under a different identity 2 hours outside the city for the past 11 years. Sung's team found her at your apartment building. She said she'd been watching from a distance for months, trying to work up the courage to make contact, terrified that showing herself would put you in exactly the kind of danger you're in right now. Tasha's knees nearly buckled. Jun-hyuk caught her before she hit the floor, arms wrapping around her as the sob she'd been holding back for 20 years finally broke loose. She's alive, Tasha whispered into his chest. She's actually alive. She's alive, he confirmed, holding her tighter. And in 1 hour, you're going to see her face for the first time in 20 years. But even as he said it, over the top of Tasha's head, his eyes met Sung's across the room, and something passed between them, a warning, a dread neither of them said out loud in front of her. Because the same team that confirmed Elena Reynolds was alive had also confirmed something else. Cho Min-suk's men were already converging on her location. The reunion Tasha had waited 20 years for was about to become the most dangerous hour of her life. The safe house where Elena Reynolds had been taken sat on the edge of the city, a converted farmhouse surrounded by open fields, the kind of place chosen because anyone approaching could be seen from a mile away. It hadn't been enough. By the time Jun-hyuk's convoy arrived, dark vehicles were already parked at odd angles outside the property, and shouting was carrying across the open fields on the wind. No, Tasha breathed, already reaching for the door handle before the car had fully stopped. Jun-hyuk grabbed her wrist. You are not running in there blind. That's my mother in there. And she's going to stay safe because I am not going to let you become a hostage Cho Min-suk can use to control both of us. His voice was iron, final, the voice of a man who had made this exact calculation 100 times in his life and would not be moved from it now. Sung, get her to the trilene. I'm going in. Jun-hyuk. He turned to her, cupping her face one last time, eyes burning with something that looked like desperation wrapped in discipline. I promised you I wouldn't lose you. That promise includes not losing your mother 30 minutes after you found her again. Trust me. Before she could argue further, he was gone, moving low and fast across the field with Sung and 4 other men, disappearing into the dark and the shouting. Tasha crouched behind the trilene exactly where she'd been told, every instinct in her body screaming to run toward the farmhouse instead of away from it, watching flashlight beams sweep across the darkness like something from a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The shouting slowed, then stopped, replaced by an eerie, ringing silence that felt somehow worse than the noise had been. Then a figure emerged from the farmhouse, moving fast across the field toward the trilene, and Tasha's heart seized until she recognized the silhouette Jun-hyuk, one arm supporting a woman who stumbled beside him, gray threading through hair that had once been jet black, a face lined with 2 decades of hiding, but unmistakably, achingly familiar. Mom? The word cracked out of Tasha before she could stop it, a word she hadn't said out loud in 20 years. Elena Reynolds stopped dead in the middle of the field, staring at her daughter like she was seeing a ghost of her own making. Tasha. Her voice broke entirely on the single syllable. My God. Look at you. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. She closed the distance at a run, and Tasha met her halfway, and the two of them collided in an embrace that held 20 years of grief and guilt and desperate, aching love. I'm so sorry, Elena sobbed into her daughter's hair. I am so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if he believed we were both gone, he'd stop looking, and you could have a normal life, and I told myself every single day that it was worth it, that your safety was worth never hearing your voice again, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I took from you. You're here, Tasha said, gripping her mother like she might vanish again if she let go. You're here right now. That's all that matters. Jun-hyuk stood a few feet back, watching the reunion with an expression Tasha would remember for the rest of her life: quiet, fierce satisfaction, the look of a man who had finally, after 8 months of watching from a distance, done the one thing he'd set out to do. But the moment didn't last. Sung's voice cut through the field, sharp with urgency. Jun-hyuk, we have a problem. He turned, and Tasha followed his gaze to see 2 of his own men standing surrounded not by Cho Min-suk's forces, but by 3 men in familiar dark jackets, flanking a figure stepping out from behind the farmhouse with unhurried, arrogant calm. Daniel. Cousin. Jun-hyuk said, voice gone dangerously quiet. I should have known you'd show up to watch your handiwork in person. I came to collect what's mine, Daniel said, eyes flicking to Tasha and Elena with cold, calculating interest. Cho Min-suk is finished. My people got to him an hour ago, right after he led us straight to this location for you. Convenient, isn't it? He does the work of finding them, and I get to end this little family drama once and for all. You had Cho Min-suk taken down, Jun-hyuk said slowly, understanding rearranging itself across his face in real time. This was never about helping him get revenge. You used him. You fed him information about Tasha to draw me out into the open, knowing I'd bring my full security force to protect her, weakening my position back home while you consolidated support among the elders. You always were slow to see the whole board, Daniel said, almost fondly. Cho Min-suk wanted revenge for a 20-year-old grudge. I wanted the throne you inherited by accident of birth. Elena's daughter was simply the bait that got both of us what we wanted. And now... Jun-hyuk's voice hadn't risen, but Tasha could see the tension coiled in every line of his body, a man calculating the exact moment to move. Now you're finished out here, cousin, discredited by a scandal that traces back to Cho Min-suk's obsession with a family that betrayed him decades ago. The waitress and her mother disappeared too, unfortunately, casualties of an old grudge nobody can trace back to me. Tragic. And I inherit everything, exactly as it always should have been. There's a flaw in your plan, Daniel. Enlighten me. Jun-hyuk's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You just confessed to premeditated conspiracy and treason in front of 6 witnesses, including 3 of my men who are currently recording this conversation on a direct feed to the Elders' Council. Daniel's confidence flickered for the first time. You forget, Jun-hyuk continued, voice dropping low and lethal. I didn't survive 20 years in this world by trusting easily. The moment Sung confirmed your involvement, every device on this property started transmitting. The council is listening right now, cousin. They just heard you admit to orchestrating your own family's downfall for power. There is no throne waiting for you after night. There's only the judgment you're about to face. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then Daniel lunged toward Tasha, closing the distance in a blur of desperation, and Jun-hyuk moved faster, intercepting him mid-stride, wrestling him to the ground with brutal, practiced efficiency before he ever reached her. Sung and the others swept in behind him, and within seconds, the 3 men who had flanked Daniel were on the ground, restrained, while Daniel himself knelt in the dirt, breathing hard, the arrogance finally drained from his face. You won't touch me, Daniel spat. The council will want to see me tried properly. You wouldn't dare handle this yourself. You're right, Jun-hyuk said, straightening, adjusting his coat with chilling composure. I won't touch you. I'm going to do something far worse. I'm going to let you live long enough to watch everything you try to take from me remain exactly where it belongs. He turned away from his cousin entirely, closing the distance to Tasha and Elena in 3 long strides, and for the first time since the diner door had exploded open hours earlier, his shoulders finally, visibly relaxed. "It's over," he said, looking at Tasha like she was the only solid thing left in a world that had spent all night trying to spin apart. Cho Min-suk is finished. Daniel will answer to the Council for treason, and he will never hold power in this organization again. You're safe. Your mother is safe. It's finally actually over. Tasha looked between the man who had stormed into her diner and rewritten the entire trajectory of her life, and the mother she'd grieved for 20 years standing very much alive beside her, and felt something break open in her chest that wasn't grief this time. It was relief so total it nearly buckled her knees. Over, she repeated softly, like she was testing whether the word was real. Over, Jun-hyuk confirmed, reaching for her hand. Whatever comes next, you don't face it alone. Not tonight. Not ever again. 3 weeks passed before the dust truly settled. The Elders' Council stripped Daniel of every title and privilege he'd been born into, exiling him to a remote outpost of the organization's holdings where he would spend the rest of his life under permanent watch. A fate Jun-hyuk had chosen deliberately over execution, because as he told Tasha one quiet evening on the balcony of the penthouse, killing him would have made me exactly what he accused me of being. I'd rather he live long enough to understand what he threw away. Cho Min-suk's remaining network, leaderless and exposed after Daniel's confession implicated every associate connected to the plot, collapsed within days, picked apart by rival factions eager to claim territory now that its architect was gone. For the first time in over 2 decades, no one on Earth was hunting Elena Reynolds or her daughter. Elena moved into a modest house Jun-hyuk arranged 2 blocks from the penthouse, close enough that Tasha could see her every day, far enough that she could finally, slowly, rebuild a life that belonged entirely to her rather than to the shadows she'd spent it hiding in. The 2 of them spent hours together making up for 20 stolen years, Elena teaching Tasha the Korean phrases she'd picked up from David Reynolds during their forbidden courtship, Tasha showing her mother photographs of a childhood spent without her, both of them crying and laughing in equal measure over dinners that stretched late into the night. "I used to think love like your father's and mine only led to tragedy," Elena told her one evening, watching Tasha across the table with an expression that mixed pride and worry in equal measure. "I watched what loving him cost us. It's why I've been afraid every single day since you told me about Jun-hyuk." "He's not Cho Min-suk," Tasha said gently. "And I'm not you at 23, hiding a relationship because I'm afraid of what it might cost. He's already shown me exactly what he's willing to sacrifice to keep the people he loves safe. That's exactly what worries me. Loving someone in that world means loving someone who will always have enemies." "Maybe," Tasha admitted. "But I spent 26 years being safe and invisible and alone, and it took almost losing my life to learn that being safe and alone isn't actually living. I'd rather have a life with real stakes and real love than another decade of nothing happening to me at all." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand, something like reluctant peace settling over her features. "You sound like him, you know. That same certainty." "Good," Tasha said, smiling for what felt like the first time without an edge of fear behind it. "I could use a little of his certainty." That certainty walked through the door 40 minutes later, when Jun-hyuk arrived to collect Tasha for dinner, greeting Elena with the kind of respectful warmth that had, against every expectation, won her over completely in the 3 weeks since the farmhouse. He'd visited nearly every day, not out of obligation but because he understood, in a way few people could, exactly what it meant to rebuild a family from wreckage. Later that night, on the same balcony where he'd first shown Tasha old photographs of her mother laughing at 23 years old, Jun-hyuk reached into his coat and produced a small velvet box, and for once, the man who commanded organizations without raising his voice looked entirely, endearingly unsteady. "I know it's fast," he said, turning the box over in his hands without opening it yet. "I know we've technically known each other for 3 weeks, even though I feel like I've known you for 8 months, and I know everything about how we met is the opposite of how anyone imagines falling in love. But I've spent my entire life protecting people out of duty. You're the first person I've ever wanted to protect purely because the world is better with you in it than without you. Jun-hyuk. Let me finish, he said, and something in his voice made her go quiet, made her heart climb into her throat. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I know that's not fair to ask of someone whose entire life turned upside down 3 weeks ago. But I am asking you to let me build something with you.
Slowly.
On your terms. A life where the drama of that first night is the exception, not the rule. Where you get to have quiet mornings and boring Tuesdays and every ordinary thing you never got to have. Tasha felt tears gathering, not from grief this time, but from something warmer, fuller. 26 years in the making. You stormed into my diner and threatened to destroy a man's entire existence to protect a waitress you'd never officially met, she said, voice thick. I don't think either of us knows how to do ordinary things. No, he admitted, a real smile finally breaking across his face, the first one she'd seen without tension underneath it. But I'd like to learn. With you. She closed the distance between them, answer written across her face before she ever said the word out loud, and when their lips met this time, there was no danger outside, no enemies converging, no impossible truths waiting to be unearthed. There was only the quiet certainty of two people who had survived everything together and chosen, deliberately, to keep choosing each other on the other side of it. Somewhere across the city, the diner where it all began was already being rebuilt. New glass fitted into the frame where a mafia boss had once thrown open the door to save a stranger's life. Tasha would visit it one final time before she officially resigned, standing in the spot where Bobby Hale had once gripped her wrist and threatened everything she had, and feel nothing but gratitude for the terrifying, impossible night that had led her here, to a mother returned from the dead, to a truth 20 years buried, and to a love she never could have imagined walking through that door. Touch her, Jun-hyuk had said that first night, and I'll destroy your entire existence. He never had to say it again, because by the time anyone else tried, there was nothing left of Cho Min-suk's empire to send them, and nothing in this world capable of tearing Tasha and Jun-hyuk apart after everything they'd already survived to be together. If this story had you holding your breath, make sure you smash that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment, and subscribe for more emotional, dramatic love stories just like this one. New videos drop regularly, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.